When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Guys YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be talking about the top 10 characters that the show did better, or maybe added to their character and made them a bit better. Now, with this video, I have to preference this is going to be on the first couple seasons, because if we talk about the ending or the last two seasons in this video, then really there's no characters that can be on this list unless they died early on. So that is something I want to preference right before we start the video. Now, before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do it up channel grow, reach our people that might like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So let's start off with number 10. Now, this is a hard video to do because, in my opinion, there's not a lot of characters the show did better than the books, or at least added on in the books, or added in the show onto the book material. So it's really hard to do the first couple on here because I think there's like a solid like 7 that are like, yes, definitely glad that they did things like this. But the rest, the bottom 3, it's kind of like I'm picking and choosing things. So you'll see what I mean. So number 10 is going to be Robert Baratheon. I think the reason I decided to put him on this list is because in the show, I think he gets a bit more screen time, and we get extra conversations like his conversation with Cersei, which I think is one of the best scenes in the entire show. Talking about kind of their marriage and all like that stuff, like the Dothraki were to come over and all that stuff. I think that's a very good scene. And I think they gave him a bit more comic relief, and I think we're led to like Robert Baratheon more in the show than we are in the books. We're still supposed to like kind of like Robert to a degree. But I think it's not a character where I feel like they did immensely better in the show. I think it's just nice. We got some additional scenes that we didn't see in the books because of POVs and all that stuff in the book. So I think this is a character that positively was impacted in the earlier seasons when George was heavily involved. And I think Robert Baratheon's a really great case of book adaptation done well to the TV show atmosphere. Number 9, this one might be controversial, not really sure, but I'm going to put Ygritte on the list. So I liked Ygritte and Jon's relationship on the show a bit better than the books. I just think we saw more of it in the show. And I also think the death scenes, so Ygritte's death, is handled a bit better in the show, in my opinion. I think it hits a little bit harder because in the books it's a bit different. We don't really know if Ygritte dies right away. Like Jon kind of thinks, that could be her or something like that. And then we find out a little later once he goes down from the tower, he kind of figures out, okay, this is actually Ygritte, and he kind of, dies in his arms and all that stuff. In the show, I kind of like it that it's kind of during the battle. The cinematography is great in that episode. I really like the way that's handled. And also, Rose Leslie and Kit Harington are actually married, so they had great chemistry and all that. So that also helped. So I think that was another positive one. Again, where it's not major, it's pretty minor, nitpicky things, but I liked Ygritte a tad more in the show. Number 8. So number 8 is going to be Oberyn. Now, Oberyn, the reason I'm going to say he's on here is because he has way more of a bigger role and impact, I feel like, in the show versus kind of the books. I just think they gave him more scenes, right, where we're seeing more of Oberyn. And then there's also one big thing. There's one big thing that I like that the show did in Oberyn's scenes. So one of Oberyn's biggest scenes in the show was when he says, he's going to be Tyrion's champion. Now, this is done completely differently and in the books, for one. And 2, I think the biggest thing that I love that the show did is that the whole story of Tyrion kind of being a baby and how Cersei was to him, and Oberyn telling that story of how, like, the first time they'd met is actually said much earlier in the books. In the show, they kind of keep that to their chest and their cards and play it at a really emotional moment to build that emotion. So I think that's a really great job that the show did in that regard, and it's something I liked a bit better. So I will say I think the show improved upon Oberyn in the books. Number 7. So here and up, I think are characters that either majorly got changed in the show or majorly something happened where we see more of them or other stuff along those lines. The first character is going to be Ramsay. Now, Ramsay's a character that we don't even really know he's a villain until like the end of A Storm of Swords, and then we kind of get him in A Dance with Dragons. So as of right now, we haven't seen a ton of him. You know, he is a kind of villain character, but the show, and it's something we're going to talk about with Theon on this list, is that we see much, much more of Ramsay in the show, where we kind of see how he tortures and psychologically breaks people down with Theon. And I think it's all pretty good. There's some scenes that just didn't need to be there, like Sansa's like basically getting raped was just, I don't understand why that was even in the show. It's something that the books also kind of did, but it's like we weren't really there to see it. It was like it's implied, but there's some other real weird shit that happens with like Theon and Jane Poole on Jane's wedding night. So we're not going to go there, but I think Ramsay overall was the last great villain of Game of Thrones. I think after the Battle of the Bastards and Ramsay's demise, there really wasn't another great villain. I mean, Cersei's a good villain, but she didn't have anything to do for like the last season and a half, really. So to me, Ramsay was definitely a character that improved off of the show for kind of a lot of reasons, just mainly because of more screen time. Number 6, Jorah. Now, Jorah is a weird one because I talk about this character all the time when it comes to best things that the show did. In the books, Jorah comes off kind of like just a pedophile. It's really weird because Dany's really young. In the show, it's like, okay, it's Emilia Clarke. What dude's not falling for Emilia Clarke? Like, you know, in the books, it's like Dany's like 14, 15, and here's Jorah like almost like, or not almost, forcing a kiss on Dany and being just weird. And then Jorah is also kind of described as being very hairy, kind of like a bear. Something that I don't think would have translated well to the TV show. So I think the TV show definitely improved on it because Jorah's love for Daenerys felt a bit more natural, and it's something that in the book seems very much out of lust. So to me, I think that was a great change. I think Jorah very much is a better character within the show and more likable as well. Number 5. So number 5, and we're also going to talk about number 4, because I think the Tyrells in general did better on the show because we saw more of them, right? Marjorie is a character that, for the most part, we don't see a ton of, right? Because we see all of the King's Landing plot after the Purple Wedding, and Storm of Swords comes through really Cersei and Jaime for the most part. So we don't really see a lot of Marjorie, right? Marjorie's kept very mysterious. We don't know how much, to what extent she's up to. The show makes her very much a front runner in the player of the Game of Thrones, whereas the books, it's kind of like, is she not, you know, and all that. And Olenna, on the same way, we see more of Olenna in the show than we do the books. Olenna is very actively a player, and it's something we just really never see when it comes to the books. We see Olenna sparring with Tywin in the show, with Varys, with Tyrion. A lot of things we just do not see in the books. So I think a lot of reasons why some of these characters will be on here is because we see more of them within the show. So that's going to get through our number 5 and number 4. Kind of interchangeable with Olenna and Marjorie. But yeah. Getting into our top 3. So our top 3 is going to be, number 3 starting out, is going to be Theon. So Theon, I think my big thing with Theon is, we see a little bit more of him before. See, the thing is, he's a weird character, right? Because we see Theon a bit, like he gets his POV a little bit later in the book series. Or not, yeah, in the book series. But in the show, we're kind of given a lot of Theon quite early on. And he's kind of a much bigger role early on in the story. And I think seeing Theon and what he goes through is really there for us show watchers to really sympathize with Theon, because in the books it's very weird, right? Because we see him get kind of knocked out, he's kind of captured or whatever, and then there's like a book where he just does not appear. We don't know what happens to him, and then he comes back and he's Reek. We don't even know it's Theon. We are left to figure that out ourselves, and we're given context clues as well, and we see he's just a completely different dude. We're given hints of what happened to him, but actually seeing that on the screen really goes to building not only Theon, you know, our sympathies for him and we wanting to see him have a redemptive arc, but also Ramsay. And it's something I talked about in this video already. So I think that was a big thing for me with Theon. Theon's a weird one because I think Theon is one of the characters, if you look at from the entire show, had a reasonably okay finish to his arc, with protecting Bran and giving his life for the Starks after he had invaded their home and betrayed them only a few years before. So I think Theon, out of the entire show, was one of the best like character arcs from season 1 to season 8, but I don't think was the most improved because I think already he had a pretty good baseline from the books. It's just they kind of added some things in with Theon and made him more of a major character than in the books. Now, number 2. This is going to be a surprise to a lot of you because you guys know I do not like Catelyn. In the books, she is a character I dislike heavily. We see a lot of her thoughts. She is someone that acts completely off of emotion almost. And she's a character that screws over a ton of people. But in the show, she comes off quite differently. Where in situations in the books where it's like, okay, Catelyn, this was just stupid. In the show, it comes off a bit differently. Like, Jaime getting released makes more sense in the show than it does the books, right? Where in the show, it's like, okay, Jaime, it's not looking like he's going to survive the night, right? Like, and this is what Catelyn's told from Brienne and all that. So it makes sense that, okay, if Jaime's going to die, then, maybe, if you're getting into Catelyn's head, it's like, okay, maybe I can get my daughters back instead of him pointlessly dying. And there's just a lot of things where they go out and make their way out to have Catelyn be a more likable character, which is something that definitely is there because I actually liked Catelyn in the show, and then I read the books after the Red Wedding and all that had happened, and I did not like Catelyn. Not even close to the same way, seeing inside her thoughts and how she is and kind of the big scenarios that define Catelyn. Really not a fan of Catelyn in the books, but in the show, I think she was done. And again, Michelle Farley, one of the best actresses on the show, if not the best. She makes the Red Wedding hit so hard, and the hauntingness of that scene is amplified by her beautifully acting. You can almost feel like it, like that this is not an actress and an actor with, Rob, with Richard Madden, that like her son actually is dying in front of her, and it hits really hard. She does a fantastic job. So it's almost not like the show improved her, that the actress did such a wonderful job in making her seem like a really loving mother, making her, much more likable. And I think George is someone that wanted Catelyn to be a divisive character, where she was a character where people will hate her and people will like her. And that to me is the thing. And I think the show kind of went the opposite route with that. And I think it helps that the show didn't go the Lenny Stoneheart route when it comes to that idea, because there wasn't as much Stoneheart in Catelyn before the Red Wedding, in my opinion, whereas in the books it definitely was there. So yeah, that's number 2. That'll be Catelyn. Number 1, I think, is pretty obvious. I think it's Robb Stark. I think there's situations where Robb maybe didn't have his. I made a video last week where I was talking about Robb's love interest in Jane Westerling and also Talisa in the show, and how maybe that hurt Robb's character. But the sheer fact is, when you look at the books, we don't get a lot of Robb, really. I mean, we get him early on, and then when he starts his war campaign, Catelyn's not with him that much. Like, it's always her going from here to there, running, errands and stuff like that. And we just don't get a lot of Robb. We don't get a lot of Robb in the Westerlands when he meets Jane Westerling. We don't get a lot of his campaigns. We never get to see inside Robb's head. It's one of the things that George always wanted to do, was maybe one like POV with Robb in the Westerlands or something like that. And I think the show makes Robb much more of a main character. It makes my thing with the idea of the Red Wedding is the show did a fantastic job of building those characters to be fan favorites to then kill them off. Whereas the books, Robb is still a fan favorite, but he's definitely not one of our main characters. Like I like leading into the Red Wedding, I would not have said he was in the top 5 of main characters or even top 10, right? Because it feels like he's almost like a side character almost, or a major side character, because Catelyn's kind of our main character in the Robb camp, whereas Robb, he's never given our POV. We're not with him for points of time. So yeah, and then that's kind of how that goes with having POVs. I think the show did a fantastic job showing his relationship with Talisa, showing, you know, battles or whatnot. I really wish we would have been able to see more of the actual battles if the budget had been higher, but it wasn't at the time, so whatever. But I think for me, Rob is the best character that gets transformed from the books to the show. Rob, I've always said this, in the show was my favorite character, so the Red Wedding hit me extra hard. Here's what I'll say about the Red Wedding. If I ever did a book to show comparison of the two, I think the book did a much better job of setting up the atmosphere, and that's just because you're inside Catelyn's mind, so you can kind of feel the unease within inside her, and a lot of things that are done and these subtle hints. There are more of them in the books than there are the show. So I think the atmosphere, the tone, the hints, the subtle hints you're given for the Red Wedding is better in the books. But I think the show moments, the acting performances elevate that even higher. So I think both did well, and I think the books did the better of the two. But the show with their acting performances with Richard Madden and characters like Michelle Farley did a fantastic job with that scene. So that is my top 10. Let me know what you guys think. Did I leave a character out that you guys thought should be in here? What do you guys think? Do you think the Sand Snakes are better in the show? But yeah, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.